I want to start this video by saying I'm sorry. I'm sorry about how modern we're going today. Today we're upgrading a 13-year-old CPU with an 11-year-old CPU.
The lab PC has been a protagonist of a couple of videos now. I've been using it with the 6-core 12-thread Xeon x5670 since my Cyberpunk video, and I completely forgot about the i7-920 I had before. The truth is, I did this upgrade and I have no idea what the performance delta between them is. So let's get into it. Let's see what you gain by doing this upgrade from the 4-core i7-920 to the 6-core Xeon x5670. The i7-920 was released in November 2008 for a recommended price of $305. This is the lowest SKU of the Bloomfield's i7s released for the x58 chipset. It has 4 cores and 8 threads with a clock speed of 2.66 GHz, a max turbo speed of 2.93, and 8 MB of cache. I love this type of CPU because it's the cheapest of the i7s for the 1366 socket, and you can't go wrong with the performance of a desktop i7. See what I did there? Desktop? Yeah, 2-core mobile i7, I'm looking at you. Now looking at the other CPU, the Xeon x5670, it was released in March of 2010 for a recommended price of $1,443. I know that sounds like a lot, but now, roughly 10 years later, both of these CPUs cost next to nothing, so the price is mostly a fun fact. Xeon CPUs were mostly sold to be used in enterprise servers, so us gamers weren't really their target demographic for the CPU. The Westmere CPU in question has 6 cores and 12 threads at a base clock of 2.93 GHz, and a turbo boosts up to 3.33. The CPU also has more cache than the i7-920 with 12 MB total. For the test platform, we're using an Asus Rampage 2 motherboard with the x58 chipset. In fact, the x58 chipset was the only one to support the 1366 socket CPUs in desktop home computers. There were other chipsets, but only for server applications. One of the coolest features of this platform is the triple channel memory, and of course we're taking advantage of that using 6 sticks of 1333 MHz DDR3 RAM for a total of 12 GB. 12 GB is not ideal to test games in current times, but rest assured, 10 years ago, when all this hardware was created, it was more than enough. We're also using a GTX 1060 released in 2016. Although it was a mid-range video card, it was released 6 years later than our newest CPU, and it should be more than enough to max out both of these guys. For the tests, we have a slew of games and a couple of software that should determine how these CPUs stand against each other. So let's start with the games. We already know both these CPUs are quite capable for their age, and the idea is to show their performance delta. So let's start with a reboot of a beloved series, Tomb Raider, released in 2013. This game looks fantastic for the time, and it was really happy to get the extra performance of the Xeon x5670. Both in 1680x1050 and in 1280x800, the performance almost doubled. This was the only game we tested that delivered this type of performance delta, so don't count on it. Released in 2015, Batman Arkham Knight was the last of the recent Batman games trilogy. In 1680x1050 we ended up being a bit GPU limited, but if you consider the lower resolution of 1280x800, the upgrade awards a 15% increase in performance. Deus Ex Mankind Divided was released in 2016, and the story here is much like what we saw in the Batman benchmark, with the higher res being limited by the GPU, and with the upgrade showing a performance advantage of 18% with the faster CPU in the lower resolution. Borderlands 3 was released in 2019, and it's the newest game we're going to run here. We could probably keep on pushing both of these CPUs, but this should be enough to tell us the story of how an upgrade like this can go. Recent games can cause us a problem because we start to see bottlenecks in other components like the video card and the amount of RAM, and we ruin our point of stressing the CPU. Nevertheless, Borderlands 3 takes good advantage of the extra cores and had a 34% boost in performance with the Xeon in the higher resolution of 1680x1050. Frame times are also much better, and although playable with the i7-920, there were frequent lockups. Now let's take a look at some synthetic benchmarks. In Geekbench, the x5670 was 17% faster in single-core performance and 61% faster in the multi-core performance test. Of course, with the 2 extra cores of the 5670, this makes total sense. In Cinebench, the story repeats itself with a 64% advantage to the Xeon CPU. For games that can take advantage of the extra clock and cores of the Xeon, it does give a significant performance kick. And since you can probably get the CPUs for cheap, you can extend the utility of the x58 platform even more.
So I hope you guys enjoyed this one, and if you want to look at an older PC, why not check out this video where I built a retro PC with a Slot 1 CPU.